everyone, so this is my second video about Andrei Tarkovsky's masterpiece, Mirror, a beautiful and mysterious film about the nature of memory. In my first video, I spoke about the film in kind of broad, general terms. I dug into some of its themes, and I really wanted to get at what made it beautiful, what made it an exceptional piece of cinematic art. Now, in this video, I'm going to get a little bit more specific. I want to talk about a single scene from the film. I'm not going to spend too much time rehashing what I spoke about in my last video. So if you're not familiar with the film, or if you want a little bit of a refresher on some of its themes and ideas, or if you just want to hear what I said about the film and you missed my first video, I'm going to put a link in the description. You can go and watch that now if you would like. But, as I said, right now, I really want to dig into just one scene from the film. And you know, it's funny because this is a film full of absolutely beautiful and gorgeous scenes. This is a film full of just wonderfully captivating and mysterious and mystical imagery. This is a film that dives deep into Russian history, that really digs deeply into a single person's life and examines it from all of these different angles and through all of these different lenses. This is a film where some individual shots are framed in such a way as to mimic classical works of Russian art. And yet, the scene that left the most distinct first impression on me was a much simpler one. The image that I just could not shake after watching this film for the first time was of a ring of condensation left by a teacup slowly evaporating off of a tabletop. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like the most pretentious thing that perhaps any human being has ever said. You know, here's this film full of all these wonderful and inventive and captivating images. And yeah, you dude, you're fixated on a teacup. You're fixated on some water vapor evaporating. I can see why that might sound odd. I can see why that might sound pretentious. I can see how that might sound like something the most obnoxious art snob in the world would say. But, stick with me here. Stick with me here. We're going to dig into that scene. I'm going to give you some context. We're going to frame that scene, and hopefully, when I'm done talking about it, you'll walk away appreciating it as much as I do. So, first off, let me summarize the scene for you, because even though I framed it as being a scene about a teacup, there's actually a lot more to it than that. So, this scene is a little peculiar, because unlike most of the scenes in this film, it doesn't revolve around the film's protagonist, Alexei. Instead, it revolves almost entirely around his son, Ignat. So this moment in the film starts off with Ignat's mother preparing to leave him alone at Alexei's flat. So Alexei and his former wife are divorced, and Ignat had been living with his mother, but they had just had a discussion and decided that Ignat should stay with his father for a little while. Now, at this point, Alexei is not in the house. Ignat is being left home completely alone, and there's this sort of quick sense of separation anxiety. There's this moment where he's going to be left alone in his father's house for the first time. And as his mother is preparing to leave, she accidentally spills the contents of her purse all over the floor. And so Ignat comes over and starts to help his mother pick up the change and other items that she's dropped and put them back in her purse. And while he's helping his mother pick these items up from the floor, Ignat suddenly experiences a shock. It seems almost like a static electric charge. And when his mother notices him have this kind of jolt and asks him what's wrong, he describes an experience that we would basically recognize as déjà vu, even though he doesn't use the term déjà vu. He talks about feeling like he's been in this place before, doing this before, even though he has never been there before. And then his mother gets up and she leaves the apartment, and almost as soon as she's gone, he turns around and he sees a woman sitting at a table in a room behind him who was certainly not there a moment ago, who seems to materialize out of thin air. And this woman has not appeared previously in the film. She's not identifiable as any member of his family. She's not an aunt or a grandmother or anyone else that we, the audience anyway, would recognize. We have no way of knowing why she's in Alexei's flat and how she got there. And there's a servant in the room with this woman who also wasn't there a moment ago. And she asks the servant to get her a cup of tea. And then, after the servant leaves, without really introducing herself, without providing any context at all, she asks Ignat to reach into a bookshelf and remove a notebook. And she asks him to read an underlined portion in the notebook. And the underlined portion turns out to be a selection from one of Pushkin's letters. Pushkin being a very famous Russian author. And then, after Ignat finishes reading this excerpt of Pushkin's writing, without any other additional explanation, this woman tells him to go and answer the door. So he goes to the door of his father's apartment, opens it, and there's a woman standing in the hallway. An entirely different woman who we also haven't been introduced to before. This woman basically says, "Oh shoot, I have the wrong apartment." And then she leaves, and Ignat closes the door and turns around, and the mysterious woman who he'd been talking to before has just disappeared. But, the ring of condensation from her teacup is still present on the table that she was sitting at. And we slowly watch this ring of condensation evaporate. Wow. Suddenly, this really ominous, booming, very dark music cuts in. And we just watch as the water vapor on this table just slowly disappears. We watch this ring of condensation from the teacup on the tabletop completely evaporate. There's no cut here. This is a remarkably long take of just pure evaporation while this really, really insidious music plays in the background. And then suddenly the music cuts out. The table is empty again. There's no sign of at all of this woman. And the camera cuts back behind Ignat. And something remarkable has happened, because the room that he's looking into, the room that he's standing in front of, this is a shot that's framed behind Ignat. So we're looking at him from the back while he is looking into this room. That room that he is looking into has entirely changed. It is in no way, shape, or form the room where he met the mysterious woman who has now completely vanished. And then, before we can really acclimate ourselves to what the hell just happened, the phone suddenly rings, and Ignat goes and answers the phone, and it's his father, Alexei, on the line, and then he has this conversation with his father. And just like that, we're jolted out of this very weird and very alien scene, and back into something resembling the real world. So what the hell is going on with this scene? It's a weird scene. It's a weird scene. It's a scene that follows logic that is alien even by the standards of this film, which is often opaque and disorienting. So let's dig into it. If you're anything like me, you left this scene feeling deeply unsettled, feeling like something was profoundly, even spiritually wrong, feeling like you had just witnessed something maybe even scary, but you might not be able to say why. And certainly I wasn't able to say why the first time I watched the film through. And I think in order to understand where that visceral emotional response to this scene comes from, how a scene that culminates or climaxes in some water vapor evaporating off of a tabletop could be so unsettling. You have to look at how this scene reflects some of the larger themes of the film. Now, I talked about this a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, in my last video, but one of the fundamental themes of Mirror is failed communication and how hard it is to communicate our memories and experiences to others, whether they're members of our own family or whether we're talking about some deeper communication between generations. And boy, there's a lot of failed communication happening in this scene. All kinds of different varieties of failed communications and all these weird little disunities between characters. So first of all, you have the big one. You have the glaring one. You have this ghostly seeming woman, this apparition, who, by the way, is dressed in a historical style, who is immediately recognizable as not being from the same time and place as Ignat. So that's the most obvious, immediate, and jarring disconnect in this scene. You have this woman who seems to be from a different time and place, who just appears out of nowhere, and who never really clearly communicates who she is, why she's there, and even what she wants from Ignat, besides making this really odd request that he read this very specific passage from this very specific book. But there are other more subtle moments in this scene that also underscore that failure to communicate, to see eye to eye, this sense of people being separated from each other by barriers that even perhaps they can't fully comprehend and understand. Another obvious one is the woman at the door. Not only does she serve as this sudden moment that breaks the flow of the scene up to that point, that breaks this weird shared moment between Ignat and this ghostly woman, but she also is at the wrong door. She is not where she's supposed to be. And so you have this really far more mundane exchange between her and Ignat than the exchange between him and the mysterious woman. But still a deeply awkward exchange rooted in miscommunication, rooted in confusion, rooted in a mistake, her being at the wrong door at the wrong time. So you have no communication there. You have another kind of misconnection moment. And then you have that letter from Pushkin that the woman asks Ignat to read. And this letter, I just glossed over it in my summary of the scene. I didn't really talk about what it was about. But the letter deals with the schism between the Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. And if you're not familiar with the Great Schism, basically long ago, in the pre-medieval period, the Catholic Church, which up to that point had largely been one entity, and which had been relatively recently propped up by the Roman Empire, had this great division form. There was, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details here because I don't know most of them, but essentially the end result was that the Catholic Church split into what we today refer to as the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And Eastern Orthodoxy, I mean, it's right there in its name, right? Eastern Orthodoxy would end up being the sort of primary Christian religion of Asia and Russia and parts of Eastern Europe, while the Roman Catholic Church would cling to the remnants of the Roman Empire and was basically centered in Rome, as it's still centered in Rome, and would have, until the Protestant Reformation, kind of a stranglehold on most of Western Europe. And this letter from Pushkin that the woman has Ignat read is about how that schism, how the separation of this once unified church into two churches helped to shape the Russian character, and how it led to a kind of isolation of the Russian people who once again were in the Orthodox Church as opposed to the Catholic Church, and how that isolation, how that sense of being separated from the rest of Christendom came to shape and form Russian identity. And Pushkin goes on to kind of present the Russians as being this sort of uniquely isolated and separated people. And there's more to the letter than that, but that's sort of the rough gist of it. And I think you know what I'm going to say. This is a letter. This is a kind of academic musing on a deeper failed communication, a deeper sense of alienation and disconnection from the world, like a kind of universal Russian alienation. And so there's that theme again. And so even as Ignat seems to have no comprehension of why he's reading this thing and what the meaning of the letter is, we as the audience can start to see a hint of a deeper thematic connection there. And you know, that theme of miscommunication even extends to the more mundane moments that bookend this scene or this sequence. So this scene opens and closes with conversations between Ignat and his parents. It opens, as I said, with a conversation between Ignat and his mother as she prepares to leave him, and it closes with this phone conversation between Ignat and Alexei, his father. And you know what? Both of these conversations are full of just miscommunication. Ignat's mother doesn't seem to understand that he's just had this moment that for him is profoundly weird in like the deja vu experience that he's had. She just kind of tells him to hurry up and not to be silly, and kind of condescendingly sort of pushes him away and heads out the door. And meanwhile, in the phone call with his father that ends the scene, there's a sort of similar dynamic at play where Alexei asks Ignat, like, if he has a crush on any girls, if he's had any girlfriends. And Ignat kind of answers with incomprehension. Like, you can tell that he hasn't arrived at the point in his life where he's thinking in romantic terms. But Alexei follows that up by saying, "Oh, well, by the time I was your age, I had already had several crushes. I had fallen in love several times." And then he goes off on this personal story about this girl that he had a crush on when he was young. And that kind of segues into the next scene and into the next sequence. So even here, in what seems superficially like a moment of bonding between a father and son, there's still this massive chasm of difference of experience that separates these two characters. They just can't connect, even on this basic, very simple human level. So again and again and again, in this sequence, in this relatively short sequence, we're given moment after moment after moment where characters just cannot connect with each other. And what's more, the connective tissue between these moments themselves seems to be frayed in some way. So setting aside the way in which any individual subsection of this sequence involves miscommunication or failed communication, the connective tissue between these scenes feels frayed, it feels missing, it feels broken in some way. It feels like even these subsequences within these larger sequences are failing to communicate with each other. Like, there's not a clear logical connection. Why does the ghostly woman tell Ignat to open the door? Why is the woman at the door? Why does the ghostly woman materialize at all? Why does she show up as soon as the mother leaves? Why does she disappear after the woman answers the door? Why does she leave the ring of condensation behind? Why does the room itself change as soon as the ring of condensation evaporates? Why does the phone ring when it does? Like, the internal logic of this scene seems fundamentally at odds with itself. Like I said, even the apartment itself, even the set, does not remain a static and concrete place during this scene. That room changes. And not only does that room change, but the entire apartment seems to have changed when Alexei walks to the phone to answer it. Now, it's possible that we're just seeing the apartment from the reverse angle. So we're seeing the kind of hallway that's at the center of the shot from the opposite end, like the camera is pointing in the opposite direction now. That's totally possible. But from the audience's perspective, it seems as if even the entire concrete physical world around Ignat has, at the very least, rotated, if not changed entirely and magically in this moment. It's almost like a continuity error, except it's definitely not. It's almost like an intentional continuity error. It's almost as if the film has forgotten something fundamental about itself. It's almost as if the film is failing to communicate with itself. You know, as if there was some kind of mix-up behind the scenes and camera operators changed between shots and somebody didn't tell someone else how this shot should be framed, how this room should be laid out, and so on and so forth. It's really fascinating. Like, it operates at almost a meta level. It's almost a meta level of miscommunication in this film about miscommunication, in this film about memory, and about the way that memory changes over time. It's almost as if the memory of this shot itself has been altered mid-scene. It's almost as if it's testing the memory of the audience, or as if the audience are being urged to wonder if they've misremembered something about this set, about this apartment, about this shot, this scene, this sequence. Ah, it's so good. It's so good. But, like the film itself, this sequence isn't willing to just surrender and give up and leave us with the idea that, oh, all communication is impossible. All memory is faulty. There's nothing deeper operating beneath or behind all of this. No, because there are a couple of crucial details to this sequence that, once again, just like the larger film, hint at the possibility for some deeper, maybe spiritual understanding, hint at the possibility that there are cycles at work here, that the past may, in some ways, be in communication with the present, that maybe there is something deeper and more profound here, that not everything is pure schizophrenia, pure confusion. And one of the real hints at that in this scene is that fleeting moment of deja vu that Ignat has. Because what is deja vu? I know, like a cognitive psychologist would tell you that deja vu is just basically a processing error in the brain. It's just a cognitive hiccup, right? It's just your brain processing the present as a memory instead of processing it as an experience that's happening right now. But this isn't a scientific film. This isn't a film about neurobiology. This is a film about experiences, about, like, the way we feel, the way things feel to us. Because that's the level at which art functions. Art functions on the level of feeling. And so how does deja vu feel to the person while they're experiencing it? Well, deja vu feels like this odd sense of connection with a time outside of the time that you're experiencing yourself in the moment. Deja vu feels kind of like a spiritual hint at some deeper cycles happening in time and in reality and in history. Like, it presents a possibility that maybe history does rhyme, maybe it does repeat itself, and that maybe we can tap in to that sense of shared memory or that sense of shared experience, or maybe we can experience a memory that isn't even our own in some way, if that makes sense, right? That maybe we can, for a moment, connect either with our own past or with someone else's past or with someone else's experience. Like, Deja Vu has this kind of weird spiritual resonance to it. And I think within this scene, that's exactly how it's being used by Tarkovsky. I think Tarkovsky presents it here at the beginning of the scene, right before Ignat encounters this ghostly apparition of a woman, to hint at the fact that something about time, something about history is about to collapse, that we're about to like walk through a gate or a passage that leads to another historical moment, or that there's going to be a kind of collapse, might be a better way to put it, of two historical moments. A moment of weird connection between this woman from another time and Ignat, who is from the present, or at least the film's present, and that even if they can't quite speak directly to each other, even if they can't quite really share something fully understood with each other, there can still be that moment of connection. There's still some kind of shared humanity there. And I think the excerpt from Pushkin's letter also gets at that, because Pushkin doesn't simply say, well, the Great Schism happened and the Russian Orthodox Church was alienated from Christianity, from the rest of Christianity, for all of time. No, he actually proposes the idea that the schism may have saved Christianity as a religion and as an institution. He suggests in the letter that because Russia was this vast landmass with its own form of Christianity, it in some ways swallowed up the Mongol invasion, which Pushkin conceives of as this kind of pagan invasion, this kind of threat to the institution of Christianity itself. And he sort of offers that because the schism occurred, Catholicism, Catholic Christianity, was able to be insulated and protected from the Mongols when they arrived, and that Russia kind of swallowed that invasion up and dealt with it, and that it didn't leave this larger stain on all of European Christianity. And it's a weird hypothesis. It's I'm not sure if it's a historical hypothesis that I 100% buy into, but within the context of the film, it's really interesting because it hints at the possibility of some kind of greater historic purpose and some kind of greater destiny even, and a way in which maybe this historical event that seemed to isolate and alienate Russia from the rest of the European world may have also protected Europe's culture or identity or religion in some sense too. And so you have this larger sense of maybe there being some purpose, some rhythm, some sense to history. And another really interesting thing here is that as Ignat reads this letter, even though he clearly doesn't comprehend what he's reading, like he stumbles over it, he actually starts to read the wrong part of the notebook at first, and then he finally finds what he's supposed to read, and he doesn't seem to understand it. But as he's reading, the camera pans over to the face of the spectral woman, and as he reads, you get this real sense that she's suddenly filled with deep emotion. Like you can see this kind of profound sadness or feeling come over her face. You get this sense that this letter means something of great importance to her, even if it means almost nothing to Ignat, and that he is, even if he's not understanding it, he is communicating something to her. He's providing her with some sense of meaning, even as the audience watches on with some confusion. Okay, but what about that ring of condensation? Because that's what we started with, right? And that is in a real way the climax of this sequence. Everything that happens before and after the sequence kind of exists around this great well of thematic gravity that's provided by the evaporation of this single little ring of condensation left by this teacup. So why? So why is that the center of this scene? Why is that the climax of this entire sequence? Especially given how wild the things that happen around it are. Well, personally, I think that this very simple, very direct image pulls together a lot of the themes and the emotion and the significance, not only of this scene, but of the entire film in a very profound and very beautiful way. So first of all, what is unique about condensation? Well, it's simultaneously tangible and intangible. You have the kind of perfect image of a thing that exists in the state of ceasing to exist, that is as fleeting and intangible as a thing can be while still being real. And wow, like that's everything in this scene, right? So much of this sequence is about these singular moments that feel real and unreal at the same time, real and surreal at the same time. You have the mystery woman, of course, who cannot possibly be in that apartment, and yet she is in that apartment. You have the woman at the door who shows up for no clear purpose and leaves without explaining herself. You have the way that the apartment is always, on the one hand, this solid and concrete environment that Ignat occupies, and yet seems to change form around him. So that tangibility and intangibility, that sense of something being real, but being impossible to really get your hands around, something that is just going to evaporate and disappear as soon as you try to grasp it. Really, that whole sense is running through this entire scene. That whole feeling, that vibe runs through this whole sequence. But it's not simply the sense of something being real and not real at the same time, because once again, going way back to the beginning of this video, it's not simply that we watch this ring of condensation evaporate before our eyes, but this tremendous, ominous music plays at the same time. So this isn't simply supposed to be an ephemeral experience, a kind of emotionally neutral or wistful experience, an experience of questioning what's real and what isn't. This is supposed to be, on some level, a scary and disconcerting experience. And why? Why? Well, I mean, I've been kind of tiptoeing around it this whole video, but this scene is really a kind of mini ghost story. And it's funny because the entire time the woman is with us, this spectral apparition, or this woman who seems to have come from a different time, maybe this ghost of a woman, is in this scene with us. Tarkovsky treats it in a very kind of emotionally neutral way. We don't get a lot of hints about how we should be feeling about this encounter. We just feel kind of weird. We're caught off guard, but we're not being given a lot of emotional cues. It's only after she's gone and we see the ring of condensation that's left behind by her teacup that suddenly the emotional, spooky, well, maybe not spooky, but at least unnerving music kicks in. And why? Like, what is it that's so scary about water vapor? First of all, this is the moment that Ignat is actually processing what he just experienced. The fact that he just seemingly had an experience with the supernatural, or at least an experience that he can't explain and process. And so while we're watching that water vapor evaporate, we're also processing this thing we've seen that doesn't make sense to us. But also there's this wonderful duality to that condensation, to that water vapor. Not only the reality, unreality thing I was talking about, but also in terms of what it says about this woman, this apparition that Ignat just saw. Because, yes, on the one hand, like, she has just evaporated, she has just vanished like the condensation from her teacup. And so we get a sense of how intangible she was, how out of place and out of time and out of material understanding this experience was. But also at the same time, the fact that the ring of condensation remains after she has left confirms her reality. It's a physical sign that she was really physically in this room, that she wasn't simply a ghost in the classical sense, right? That she wasn't just some immaterial specter that walked through the wall and was just kind of there while not being there. She was physically in this room. If she wasn't physically in this room, she could not have left that ring from her teacup behind. There would not, she would not, her teacup would have been immaterial like her. It would have been fake like her. It wouldn't have produced heat. It wouldn't have left heat and water on that tabletop. There would be nothing for us to watch slowly evaporate. So it's this incredibly uncanny and unnerving experience where simultaneously you're processing the fact that you could not just have had the experience you just had. You could not have just seen this thing that you just saw. It couldn't possibly have been real. But at the same time, it definitely was, because here's physical proof of its existence. But I think there's an additionally unnerving existential angle to this, because this scene in some ways is potentially Ignat's first moment of reckoning with his own mortality, with the fact that he will die someday. And I don't know about you, but I had a moment as a child, as a, 11, 12 years old, when I was lying in bed, and for the first time, like, it suddenly clicked, oh, shit. Someday I am going to die, and all of this will be gone. And I think that's a fairly common experience that children, young adults, that everyone has at one point in their life, where they are suddenly forced to reckon with just how brief and ephemeral their lives are, and with the question of whether life has real, lasting, permanent substance. And I think that's a big reason why we're seeing this scene through Ignat's perspective and not through Alexi's perspective. I think it's important for us to have this experience through the eyes of a child. There's actually a comparable scene in Ingmar Bergman's miniseries Fanny and Alexander, where we see this young kid and he's just kind of in his house. He's just kind of playing make-believe. I don't remember the exact details of the scene off the top of my head, but he's just kind of in the parlor of his house and he's just kind of playing around. And we're watching this moment of childhood joy, and we're seeing this moment through the eyes of this young character. And then suddenly he looks over, and out of the corner of his eyes, he sees, and we see, the Grim Reaper, or a specter of death, just standing there. And it's this shocking moment. It's this incredibly unnerving moment where this sense of real childhood innocence and playfulness is just shattered by this brief image of death. And I think something very similar is happening in this scene, where you have a child who hasn't really fully reckoned with his mortality yet. And then he has this experience where he comes face to face with this woman who may very well be dead, who may very well be a ghost, and who suddenly forces him to consider not only the brevity of his own life, but she confronts him with the history of his country. The whole thing is unnerving and disorienting. She's there, and she's fucking gone, completely gone. And only this ring of condensation is left behind. And so while we watch this thing evaporate, this ring of vapor and heat that both has substance and doesn't have substance, that is there, but is only there and only real for one brief, fleeting moment. And as that dark, ominous music swells, we're almost forced to think about mortality. We're almost forced to consider death. And we're almost forced to consider the fact that life is so much like that, that life is not as permanent and tangible as we'd like it to be, that it is over so much more quickly than we'd like to believe it is, that our moment in time is just that. Our life is momentary, and then it's gone, and it's absorbed up and out into this larger sphere of history and whatever reality exists above and beyond and outside ourselves. And yeah, so it's a scary scene, fundamentally. It's a pretty scary scene, and also a profound and moving one. And also one, though, that does have just that little hint of optimism, just that little bit of hope that maybe, even though our lives are brief and largely intangible and really frickin' hard to understand, that maybe there is something real and concrete beyond just our simple insular little existences, our simple short little lives. And maybe we are connected to something greater in some way. Maybe we're a part of some greater narrative that we can't understand. All right, that's it. That's it. I want to apologize, first of all, here at the end. I know it's been a while between videos. I've had kind of a tumultuous month. A relative got sick and was hospitalized. I got sick, not nearly to the degree that I would have to be hospitalized. I just got a stomach flu that kind of laid me up in bed for a few days. And I've been dealing with a little bit of depression and yada, yada, yada. I don't want to go on and on about my personal life, but the point is, this video took way longer to make than I anticipated, than I planned. So I really apologize. I am going to try very hard to get on a semi-regular upload schedule from here on out, trying to do once a week, once every 2 weeks. I don't want you to be waiting a month or more between videos. So I'm very sorry for that. And I thank you very much for being patient with me. And I also want to thank everyone who watched this video. Thank everyone who stuck around to listen to me rant and ramble. If you don't mind, I would really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, if you could like, if you could subscribe, if you could hit that bell notification icon. I've never asked anyone to do that before, but I did have a couple of people comment that they didn't get my most recent videos, that my most recent videos didn't show up in their feed. So if you want to make sure you see my videos in the future, just hit that notification icon. And yeah, thank you so much. Also, I appreciate all the comments, all the nice things have been said about my previous videos. I am very much still in the process of figuring out what the hell I'm doing. So all the kind words are really appreciated. They keep me going. Anyway, that's it. I've rambled too long. This video is going to be a nightmare to edit. Thank you so much. Okay, bye.